The moment people stop asking questions is the moment the truth becomes the easiest thing to hide. By the time the afternoon traffic settled across Interstate 75, millions of people had already watched the same 38-second body camera clip and reached the exact conclusion the video invited them to reach. The recording opened with flashing patrol lights reflecting across the side of a dark gray sedan parked safely along the shoulder of the highway. A white highway patrol officer stood beside the driver's window while a black woman remained seated behind the wheel, speaking so quietly that her words were nearly impossible to hear beneath the passing traffic. The officer smiled briefly before turning toward the body camera and making a remark that immediately spread across television broadcasts, news websites, and social media accounts. Viewers filled the comment sections with certainty. Some praised the officer for remaining patient. Others insisted the woman had clearly been hiding something because she looked too calm. Hardly anyone questioned why the recording ended so abruptly only seconds after she asked a single unexpected question. Every major news network replayed the same edited clip throughout the evening. Legal commentators debated whether the driver had behaved suspiciously during the stop. Radio hosts described the encounter as another routine example of law enforcement dealing with an uncooperative motorist. Online creators slowed individual frames, circled harmless gestures with bright graphics, and confidently claimed they had uncovered hidden clues proving the officer had acted perfectly. Thousands of strangers who had never met the woman believed they understood her character after watching less than 1 minute of carefully selected footage. Across the state, inside a quiet government conference room where muted television screens displayed the same headlines, several attorneys stopped speaking as the recording appeared once again. One senior official watched the clip from beginning to end without changing expression before quietly placing a legal pad on the conference table. No one asked for his opinion because everyone in the room noticed the exact same detail. The recording stopped immediately after the woman calmly requested that every part of the traffic stop be preserved exactly as recorded. The room remained silent for several long seconds before another official finally spoke. Has anyone confirmed whether the original files were preserved? No one answered immediately. Instead, a secure telephone resting near the end of the conference table began ringing. The senior official answered with only a few quiet words before listening carefully. He nodded once, thanked the caller, and gently returned the receiver to its cradle. "Do not contact her," he said calmly to everyone in the room. "She already understands what comes next." Hundreds of miles away, satellite trucks lined the entrance to the Regional Highway Patrol headquarters. Reporters prepared live broadcasts celebrating what they described as a textbook traffic stop, supported by body camera evidence. Television producers replayed the same short clip over and over, while scrolling headlines encouraged viewers to decide who had been right long before any official review had even begun. Meanwhile, the woman at the center of the national conversation remained completely invisible. No reporters found her home. No cameras followed her. No one discovered where she had driven after leaving the roadside. The public knew almost nothing about her except the carefully edited version introduced by a few seconds of video. As evening settled across the city, soft golden sunlight entered a quiet parking garage beneath a downtown office building where the same dark gray sedan rolled slowly into an assigned parking space. The driver switched off the engine, gathered a simple leather briefcase, and paused only long enough to straighten a stack of legal papers resting on the passenger seat. She neither hurried nor appeared troubled by the storm of public opinion growing beyond those concrete walls. Somewhere above her, televisions continued repeating the edited recording. Somewhere else, thousands of comments continued judging a woman whose name most people still did not know. Hidden beneath every headline was one remarkable fact that no reporter had uncovered, no officer involved had suspected, and no commentator had imagined. The quiet woman everyone believed they understood had spent years interpreting the law from one of the highest seats of public trust in the nation, and while millions accepted an incomplete story as the whole truth, she calmly prepared for the moment when every missing second of that highway encounter would finally be seen. Judge Alicia Bennett drove the remaining miles home beneath a sky painted with the fading colors of late afternoon, as though the world itself refused to acknowledge the storm unfolding beyond the quiet walls of her car. The dark gray sedan moved steadily through familiar streets until it reached a modest brick townhouse tucked beneath rows of mature oak trees. Nothing about the home suggested extraordinary influence or public recognition. Fresh flowers rested beside the front porch, neatly trimmed hedges bordered the walkway, and a small American flag moved gently in the evening breeze. Alicia unlocked the front door, placed her leather briefcase on a wooden entry table, and paused long enough to straighten a framed photograph of her late parents before removing her blazer and hanging it carefully inside a hallway closet. The muted television in the living room continued displaying the same edited traffic stop without sound, bright headlines rolling endlessly beneath images that no longer reflected the complete truth. She picked up the remote, switched the television off, and welcomed the silence that immediately filled the room. Silence had always helped her think more clearly than noise ever could. The following morning began exactly as most mornings had for years. Before sunrise, Alicia brewed fresh coffee, opened the kitchen window to let cool spring air drift inside, and spent several quiet minutes watering herbs growing in small clay pots along the windowsill. She reviewed legal briefs while eating a simple breakfast, making handwritten notes in the margins with the same careful attention she gave every case that appeared before her courtroom. Her phone rang only once. The caller identification displayed the number of an old friend who served as a law professor. Alicia answered warmly, and the conversation never mentioned the headlines spreading across the country. Instead, they discussed constitutional history, recent appellate opinions, and plans for an upcoming legal education conference. When the call ended, she smiled softly before gathering her notes for the day. Later that morning, she stopped at the same neighborhood coffee shop she had visited nearly every Friday for years. The young barista greeted her by name, prepared her usual black coffee without asking, and asked whether she would be attending the local charity reading program for elementary school students the following weekend. Alicia promised she would not miss it. Several customers nearby glanced briefly toward the television mounted above the counter, where the edited roadside video played once again. No one recognized the woman quietly stirring cream into her coffee only a few feet away. They discussed the story confidently, believing they understood everything worth knowing because they had watched less than 1 minute of carefully selected footage. Alicia simply thanked the barista, wished everyone a pleasant morning, and walked back toward her car without correcting a single assumption. By early afternoon, she arrived at the federal courthouse where colleagues greeted her with the same professional respect they always had. Court staff handed her neatly organized case files while clerks discussed routine scheduling matters that had nothing to do with the growing public controversy. Inside her chambers, sunlight poured through tall windows onto shelves filled with legal volumes collected over decades of service. Family photographs rested beside framed copies of the Constitution and handwritten notes from former law clerks whose careers she had quietly encouraged over the years. Alicia removed the leather folder from her briefcase and placed it beside an unopened envelope bearing the seal of the Judicial Council. She looked at it briefly before returning to her work, showing no sign of impatience or anxiety. Throughout the afternoon, she listened carefully to attorneys arguing unrelated civil cases, treating every person who entered her courtroom with the same fairness she believed every citizen deserved regardless of wealth, appearance, or background. As evening approached, she left the courthouse carrying only her briefcase and a small stack of legal papers, walking alone beneath the warm glow of courthouse lights while reporters remained gathered miles away chasing a story they still did not fully understand. Before driving home, her secure government phone vibrated quietly with a single message containing only 6 words. Preserve everything. Independent review officially authorized. Alicia read the message once, locked the screen, and placed the phone back inside her purse without the slightest change in expression. She looked through the windshield toward the highway stretching across the horizon, knowing that somewhere inside the original recording waited the truth that would eventually speak far louder than every headline filling the evening news. Officer Ethan Brooks began every shift the same way he had for nearly 16 years. He arrived at the highway patrol station 20 minutes early, filled a plain white coffee mug from the break room, reviewed the previous night's incident summaries, and quietly inspected every piece of equipment before signing the patrol vehicle log. Fellow officers respected his consistency. Younger deputies often asked for advice because Ethan rarely appeared rushed or uncertain. He believed that routine created discipline and discipline created safety. His record reflected years of dependable service with dozens of commendations for professionalism and quick decision-making. Framed certificates covered one wall of the briefing room, reminding everyone who walked past that experience carried authority. Ethan had come to believe that experience also protected him from serious mistakes. That confidence followed him into nearly every traffic stop, every roadside conversation, and every report he completed. During the morning briefing, supervisors congratulated the patrol team for what they described as effective public communication after the roadside encounter had unexpectedly become national news. Television screens mounted high inside the room replayed the familiar 38-second recording while commentators praised the officers involved for remaining composed under public scrutiny. Several colleagues smiled as they watched the coverage. One deputy joked that the internet had already completed the investigation before anyone inside the department needed to finish the paperwork. Light laughter spread across the room. Ethan accepted the attention politely, neither encouraging nor rejecting it. He simply believed the situation had unfolded exactly as the public had seen it. After all, the recording appeared clear enough. He remembered the woman remaining unusually calm, speaking softly, and making one request about preserving every recording. At the time, he had considered the statement little more than an attempt to sound confident. Now it seemed like an insignificant detail compared with the overwhelming public support surrounding the stop. Once the briefing ended, Ethan returned to his desk to complete additional documentation requested by department administrators because of the growing media attention. Every report matched the information already submitted through official channels. Dates, times, weather conditions, vehicle information, and body camera references appeared organized and complete. Nothing immediately suggested that anything important had been overlooked. Yet as he reviewed the digital evidence log one final time, he noticed a small notation he did not remember seeing before. Original recording preservation request acknowledged. External review pending. The line disappeared after the database refreshed automatically. Ethan frowned for only a moment before assuming the notation reflected routine administrative processing connected to the public attention surrounding the case. Throughout the afternoon, reporters continued requesting interviews outside headquarters while department leadership assured the public that all procedures had been followed appropriately. Ethan answered a few carefully prepared questions, emphasizing professionalism, transparency, and respect for every driver encountered during patrol. His responses sounded sincere because he genuinely believed them. He had never considered himself unfair. He had never intentionally set out to treat anyone differently. Experience had taught him to trust observations made within seconds, and over time those instincts had quietly replaced curiosity. That afternoon, however, one brief conversation refused to leave his thoughts. As he completed the traffic stop days earlier, the woman had looked directly toward his body camera before calmly saying, "Please make certain every recording from today remains exactly as it was created." There had been no anger in her voice, no challenge, no fear, only quiet certainty. The memory lingered with unexpected weight. Most drivers argued, apologized, complained, or asked questions. She had done none of those things. Instead, she had focused entirely on preserving the record. Ethan found himself replaying that sentence again while driving his assigned patrol route beneath the bright afternoon sun. Traffic moved steadily along Interstate 75 as families traveled home, delivery trucks crossed county lines, and commuters filled the passing lanes without noticing the patrol vehicle parked along the median. Everything looked ordinary, yet something inside Ethan no longer felt completely settled. Late that evening, after returning to headquarters and finishing his reports, he prepared to log out of the department evidence system. Just before shutting down the computer, a secure internal notification briefly appeared across the screen. Independent Oversight Office has requested all original digital files associated with incident number 7431. Preserve without modification. Do not duplicate. Ethan stared at the message until it disappeared. For the first time since the encounter on the highway, he realized the story everyone believed might not be finished at all. The review entered its second day beneath the quiet glow of computer monitors that never seemed to dim. Inside the Independent Oversight Office, investigators no longer watched the recordings as isolated video clips. They examined every second alongside dispatch logs, patrol vehicle location records, dashboard camera footage, radio transmissions, and digital timestamps preserved directly from the department servers. Every source was synchronized with painstaking precision until the entire traffic stop unfolded exactly as it had occurred. The atmosphere inside the conference room remained almost completely silent except for the occasional click of a keyboard or the soft turning of another page inside the growing investigative file. No one expressed opinions. They documented facts. One analyst highlighted several moments where the publicly circulated recording no longer aligned with the original evidence. Another investigator compared upload histories from the department evidence management system, carefully tracing each version of the file through every authorized transfer. The differences were becoming impossible to ignore. Meanwhile, news coverage outside continued repeating the shorter recording that millions had already accepted as complete. Television hosts debated whether the driver had intended to challenge law enforcement authority, while commentators praised what they believed had been exemplary roadside professionalism. The louder the public conversation became, the quieter the investigators worked. They understood that confidence without verification had already caused enough damage. Across town, Judge Alicia Bennett finished another full day on the bench. She thanked jurors for their service after concluding a civil trial, wished a retiring court clerk well during a small farewell gathering, and remained for nearly an hour reviewing motions scheduled for the following week. Several attorneys complimented her fairness before leaving the courthouse. None mentioned the highway stop. None recognized that the woman who had patiently explained constitutional protections from the bench was the same person appearing repeatedly on evening broadcasts. Alicia gathered her legal files, placed them inside her familiar leather briefcase, and paused briefly beneath the courthouse steps as the evening sun painted long shadows across the plaza. She looked toward the distant highway stretching across the horizon before quietly walking to her car. Her secure government phone remained silent, and she never attempted to inquire about the review. Trusting due process required patience, especially when emotions outside the courtroom continued racing ahead of verified facts. At Highway Patrol headquarters, Officer Ethan Brooks noticed subtle changes that had not existed only 2 days earlier. Conversations grew shorter whenever the investigation was mentioned. Supervisors requested additional documentation regarding digital evidence handling procedures. The Department Information Technology Manager spent most of the afternoon verifying server logs, while legal advisors quietly arrived for meetings that had not appeared on the public schedule. Ethan completed every assignment requested of him without complaint, yet the memory of that roadside conversation refused to leave his thoughts. He remembered the woman's calm voice asking only that every recording remain preserved exactly as created. At the time, he believed she was merely protecting herself. Now he wondered whether she had actually been protecting the integrity of the process itself. Just before ending his shift, he received a confidential memorandum instructing every officer connected to the incident to remain available for follow-up interviews. No accusations appeared in the notice. No conclusions had been reached. The document simply emphasized complete cooperation and preservation of all records. Ethan signed the acknowledgement, folded the memorandum into his patrol notebook, and quietly walked toward the parking lot beneath the fading orange sky. Back inside the federal conference room, investigators finally reached the final minutes of the uninterrupted recording. One technology specialist enlarged the audio waveform, while another synchronized radio traffic with body camera footage frame by frame. A legal analyst slowly removed her glasses before leaning closer to the screen. The room grew even quieter than before. The complete recording revealed that several important exchanges had never appeared in the version broadcast nationwide, including one comm statement from Alicia requesting preservation of every record because, in her words, complete documentation protects both citizens and officers alike. The lead investigator closed the file gently before looking around the table. "Prepare the formal findings," he said softly. "Tomorrow morning, every assumption will have to answer to the complete record." Morning arrived beneath a sky covered with low silver clouds as the Independent Oversight Office prepared to release its preliminary findings. The atmosphere inside the federal conference room remained remarkably quiet. Thick investigative binders rested beside authenticated digital evidence, while every original recording had now been verified through multiple independent examinations. No one celebrated what had been discovered because experienced investigators understood that exposing the truth carried responsibility rather than triumph. The lead attorney slowly reviewed the final summary before placing a handwritten signature beneath the certification page. Every conclusion rested upon documented evidence, synchronized timestamps, verified chain of custody records, and complete audio that had never been available to the public. Across the polished conference table, legal specialists carefully prepared sealed packets addressed to the State Attorney General, the Judicial Oversight Commission, and the Highway Patrol Command staff. Each envelope represented another step toward accountability through lawful procedure rather than public outrage. At the federal courthouse, Judge Alicia Bennett completed another morning calendar exactly as she had every day for years. She listened attentively to arguments presented by both sides in a civil dispute, thanked each attorney for maintaining professional courtesy, and carefully explained her ruling with the same measured voice that had earned respect throughout her judicial career. Court staff noticed her familiar routine remained unchanged. During a brief recess, she paused beside a large window overlooking the courthouse plaza where sunlight gradually pushed through the clouds, illuminating families walking across the square and young law students climbing the courthouse steps with notebooks tucked beneath their arms. She quietly reflected upon how often justice depended not upon dramatic moments, but upon patient attention to every overlooked detail. Her secure government phone vibrated once. The message contained only 4 words. Findings verified. Proceed as scheduled. Alicia locked the screen without replying and returned to the courtroom before anyone noticed she had stepped away. Meanwhile, Officer Ethan Brooks reported to Highway Patrol headquarters where the usual morning conversations had become noticeably restrained. Supervisors moved between offices carrying sealed folders instead of casual conversation. Administrative staff quietly coordinated conference calls with legal counsel, while information technology personnel continued preserving server backups connected to the traffic stop. Ethan sensed the difference immediately. No one treated him unfairly, yet the confidence that had filled the station only days earlier had been replaced by careful professionalism. His commanding officer asked him to attend an afternoon administrative review concerning departmental evidence procedures. The request sounded routine, but Ethan understood that routine meetings rarely required legal advisors and independent observers. He accepted the notice respectfully and spent the remaining hours completing ordinary patrol responsibilities beneath bright afternoon sunshine stretching across Interstate 75. Every vehicle he stopped received the same calm explanation, the same courtesy, and the same complete documentation. More than once he caught himself repeating the sentence that had stayed in his thoughts since the roadside encounter. Preserve every recording exactly as created. What once seemed like an unnecessary request now felt like one of the wisest statements he had ever heard during a traffic stop. Later that afternoon, representatives from the Independent Oversight Office arrived at headquarters carrying locked evidence cases and sealed certification packets. They did not accuse anyone. They did not raise their voices. They simply requested a private conference room where department leadership, legal counsel, and administrative supervisors gathered around a long wooden table. The lead investigator placed the authenticated report before the chief administrator before calmly explaining that the complete recording presented a substantially different sequence of events than the shortened version that had circulated publicly. Several important conversations had been omitted from the widely distributed clip, including repeated statements demonstrating the driver's cooperation and her request that every part of the encounter remain fully preserved because accurate records protected both officers and citizens alike. The room fell completely silent. No one interrupted. Outside the conference room windows, late afternoon sunlight reflected across parked patrol vehicles, while a gentle breeze moved the American flag standing beside headquarters. The chief administrator slowly closed the report before looking toward the assembled supervisors. His voice remained calm when he finally spoke. We are no longer reviewing a single traffic stop. We are now reviewing whether public trust has been compromised. Those words settled over the room with quiet finality, And for the first time since the story began, everyone present understood that the next decision would reach far beyond one officer, one driver, or one afternoon along the highway. The following morning began without the usual rush of reporters gathering outside Highway Patrol headquarters. News organizations had received a brief statement confirming that an independent review remained active, but no additional details had been released. Inside the administrative building, however, every conference room had been reserved. Senior officials from the Highway Patrol, representatives from the Judicial Oversight Commission, attorneys from the Office of the State Attorney General, and investigators from the Independent Oversight Office quietly assembled around a polished walnut table where sealed evidence binders rested beneath the soft light pouring through tall windows. No one raised a voice. No one hurried the process. The lead investigator opened the meeting by presenting the authenticated findings exactly as they had been documented. The complete recording demonstrated that Judge Alicia Bennett had cooperated fully from the first moment of the traffic stop until its conclusion. Every instruction had been followed. Every request had been answered respectfully. More importantly, the original footage confirmed that she had repeatedly asked only one thing: preserve every recording exactly as it was created, because complete documentation protects both officers and citizens. That statement, removed from the version distributed publicly, became the foundation upon which the entire review turned. The investigators then displayed synchronized timelines comparing the original recordings with the shortened version that had reached television stations and social media platforms. The differences extended far beyond a few missing seconds. Entire conversations establishing context had been omitted before public release, creating an impression that no longer reflected the complete encounter. Digital audit logs further revealed weaknesses in evidence handling procedures inside the department that allowed incomplete material to circulate before independent verification had taken place. No findings suggested a mistake made by only one individual. Instead, the review identified systemic failures involving supervision, evidence review, and internal safeguards. The room remained silent as each conclusion appeared on the presentation screen. Officer Ethan Brooks sat near the end of the table with his patrol notebook resting unopened beside him. As the findings continued, he slowly realized that the confidence he had placed in routine procedures had prevented him from asking questions that should have been obvious. He had trusted that every record reaching him represented the whole truth simply because it had arrived through familiar channels. Looking toward the evidence displayed before him, he understood that experience without careful verification could unintentionally strengthen unfair assumptions. Across town, Judge Alicia Bennett concluded another morning session inside her courtroom before receiving a formal request to attend a confidential judicial administrative meeting. She entered the conference room without ceremony, greeting everyone with the same quiet professionalism she showed every day. Only after every participant had been seated did the chair of the Judicial Oversight Commission acknowledge her role. Publicly, "Judge Bennett," he said respectfully, "thank you for allowing the legal process to work without seeking special treatment." Alicia answered with a gentle nod. "The law deserves the same patience from judges that we ask of every citizen." Those simple words settled across the room with remarkable weight. The commission then announced that the independent review had uncovered sufficient evidence to recommend comprehensive external oversight of the Highway Patrol evidence management system and departmental accountability procedures. The recommendation focused on institutional reform rather than personal retaliation. New evidence preservation standards, independent auditing requirements, expanded supervisory review, and mandatory constitutional training would immediately be implemented, while additional administrative proceedings evaluated individual responsibilities. Officer Brooks quietly stood before the meeting concluded. Looking directly toward Judge Bennett, he spoke with complete sincerity. "Your Honor, I believed I was protecting the public by following the system exactly as I understood it. Today I realize that protecting the public also means questioning the system whenever complete truth has not yet been verified." Alicia met his eyes without anger or satisfaction. Public confidence is strongest when honest people are willing to improve the institutions they serve, she replied softly. Through the conference room windows, bright afternoon sunlight illuminated the state capitol skyline, while the American flag moved gently in the breeze outside. No applause followed. No dramatic celebration interrupted the silence. Instead, every person present understood that the greatest change had not come from authority alone. It had come from the quiet power of complete evidence, patient integrity, and one woman who trusted the law enough to let the full truth speak for itself. The announcement reached the public 3 days later through an official statement released jointly by the Judicial Oversight Commission and the Office of the State Attorney General. Unlike the dramatic headlines that had dominated television only a week earlier, this statement contained no sensational language and assigned no conclusions beyond the verified findings. It simply confirmed that significant procedural failures had been identified within the Highway Patrol Evidence Management System, and that comprehensive external oversight would immediately begin. Reporters who had once repeated the shortened recording without hesitation now found themselves revisiting every earlier broadcast. News anchors acknowledged that critical context had been missing from the version originally presented to the public. Editorial boards published thoughtful reflections about the responsibility that accompanied incomplete information. The conversation gradually shifted away from assumptions and toward accountability. At Highway Patrol headquarters, the atmosphere changed in quieter ways. Administrative offices welcomed independent auditors. New evidence preservation procedures appeared on bulletin boards throughout the building. Supervisors attended mandatory legal briefings, while technology specialists implemented additional safeguards designed to ensure that every original recording would remain permanently preserved from the moment it entered the system. The reforms required long hours and careful attention, yet very few officers complained. Many understood that public trust depended upon visible commitment rather than defensive explanations. Officer Ethan Brooks participated in every training session with complete focus. He no longer viewed the new requirements as criticism of his profession. Instead, he regarded them as necessary reminders that authority carried an obligation to question incomplete information before accepting it as truth. During one afternoon workshop, instructors displayed the complete recording of the highway encounter beside the shortened version that had circulated nationwide. The contrast required no dramatic commentary. Every officer in attendance could immediately recognize how missing context had transformed public perception. Ethan remained seated long after the presentation ended, quietly taking notes while younger officers asked thoughtful questions about constitutional protections, documentation standards, and professional responsibility. Later that evening, he requested permission to speak privately with the department commissioner. Entering the office, he removed his patrol cap and spoke with calm sincerity. "Sir, I believed experience alone was enough to guide every decision I made. I understand now that experience must always leave room for humility." The commissioner listened carefully before answering. "Good officers never stop learning, Ethan. The public deserves nothing less." Across town, Judge Alicia Bennett received a formal invitation to address the first graduating class of newly trained supervisors participating in the revised accountability program. She accepted quietly without requesting publicity or special recognition. On the morning of the ceremony, sunlight streamed through the Academy auditorium as rows of uniformed officers filled the seats. Alicia approached the podium with the same calm presence she carried into every courtroom. She did not mention the highway stop. She did not speak about headlines or public controversy. Instead, she spoke about trust. She explained that every interaction between government and citizen represented a promise that fairness would always matter more than assumptions. She reminded the audience that preserving complete evidence protected honest officers every bit as much as it protected the communities they served. The room remained completely silent until she finished. No speech could erase past mistakes, yet every listener understood that the future would be shaped by choices made after difficult lessons. When the ceremony concluded, Officer Ethan Brooks approached Judge Bennett with quiet respect. "Your Honor," he said, "thank you for allowing this process to teach instead of divide." Alicia smiled gently before extending her hand. Justice succeeds when institutions become stronger than their mistakes. Ethan accepted the handshake with genuine gratitude. Neither spoke another word. Around them, newly trained supervisors gathered their materials and walked into the bright afternoon carrying updated policy manuals beneath their arms, while families waited outside beneath clear blue skies. The courthouse, the academy, and the highway remained exactly where they had always been. Yet something meaningful had changed within the people responsible for protecting them. The greatest victory had never been proving one person right or another person wrong. It had been restoring confidence that complete truth, patiently examined and honestly accepted, could still strengthen the institutions entrusted with serving every citizen equally. Months passed quietly, and the highway where everything had begun returned to its familiar rhythm. Families traveled toward weekend vacations, truck drivers crossed state lines before sunrise, and commuters filled the lanes each morning without realizing they were driving through a place that had quietly changed the course of an important lesson about justice. The flashing patrol lights still appeared from time to time along the shoulder, but the procedures guiding every traffic stop had become stronger because one ordinary encounter had forced an entire institution to examine itself with greater honesty. Inside Highway Patrol headquarters, new evidence preservation systems operated automatically, creating multiple authenticated copies of every original recording before any review could begin. Independent audits became routine rather than exceptional, and every newly assigned officer completed extensive training emphasizing that complete documentation protected both the public and law enforcement equally. Officer Ethan Brooks remained with the department, but he no longer measured success by how quickly he could reach conclusions. Instead, he became one of the strongest advocates for careful verification before judgment. Younger officers often noticed that he asked the same question at the end of every training exercise. Have we seen the complete record? At first, some recruits believed the question sounded repetitive. After hearing the story behind it during ethics instruction, none of them ever forgot it again. Ethan never described himself as the hero of that lesson. Whenever colleagues praised his willingness to accept responsibility, he answered with quiet humility. The truth corrected me before I had the chance to correct myself. Across the city, Judge Alicia Bennett continued serving on the federal bench with the same quiet discipline that had defined her entire career. Her courtroom remained a place where every person received the opportunity to be heard with dignity, regardless of background, appearance, or social position. Attorneys continued preparing carefully before appearing before her, because they respected both her fairness and her attention to detail. Law clerks often noticed that she reviewed original source materials herself whenever possible rather than relying only on summaries prepared by others. She never explained why that habit mattered so deeply. She simply believed justice deserved complete information before reaching any conclusion. One crisp autumn afternoon, after concluding her final hearing of the week, Alicia stopped at the same neighborhood coffee shop she had visited for years. The young barista greeted her warmly, prepared her usual black coffee, and smiled while handing her a paper bag containing 2 fresh blueberry muffins. For the drive home? He asked. Alicia smiled gently. For someone who always reminds me to slow down and enjoy the day. She thanked him and stepped outside into cool afternoon air where golden leaves drifted across the sidewalk beneath rows of maple trees. As she reached her car, another familiar vehicle quietly entered the parking lot. Officer Ethan Brooks had stopped for coffee after completing his shift. Their eyes met briefly before he walked toward her with calm respect. Neither of them carried the weight they had once felt during that afternoon beside the highway. Ethan removed his patrol cap and smiled. Your Honor, I hope life has become quieter. Alicia looked toward the peaceful street before answering. Quiet is often where the most important work happens. Ethan nodded thoughtfully. You were right about preserving every record. She smiled again, not with satisfaction but with kindness. Complete truth protects everyone willing to respect it. They shook hands once more before continuing toward their separate cars. No reporters waited nearby. No television cameras recorded the moment. No headlines announced that too. People whose lives had once collided through misunderstanding now shared genuine respect built upon honesty and accountability. As Alicia drove home beneath the warm colors of the setting sun, the highway stretched peacefully across the horizon, carrying thousands of strangers toward destinations only they understood. Somewhere behind her, a young patrol officer carefully activated a body camera before approaching another routine traffic stop. Somewhere ahead, another citizen trusted that fairness would guide the conversation waiting beside the road. The distance between those two moments could never be measured in miles alone. It would always be measured by the quiet decision to seek complete truth before reaching judgment, Because lasting justice begins not with authority, but with the courage to see every person through the full light of the facts.